In this episode, I'm going to build this lower side sill section for the Gallardo. I'll cut out all the different parts, glue all the parts together, and then we'll fit the final completed piece to the model. Let's get started. So the first thing to do is print out all the different pieces from my design file, which I've created in Adobe Illustrator. Just kind of roughly cut each piece out, left a little bit of excess around the sides, and then I'm just going to lay that over the top of the material that I'm going to cut the part from. In this case, it's like 5mm thick foam core board. I'm going to tape it flat to the board, so I'll just use masking tape, put a little bit of tape around the sides. I'm going to tape all the way around the sides, but I could just put like a little bit of tape every few centimeters or every few inches just to keep the piece flat while I cut around it. But masking tape's good because you can like tear it into little bits and strips easily. I'm cutting this into strips because the roll that I've got is quite wide and I only need really thin strips. So if I tear it into little bits, it just makes it go further and last longer. So there we go, I've taped all the way around. I get my metal steel ruler and my 8mm sized snap-off blade craft knife. And I'll just position the ruler very carefully along the edge or the line that I want to cut. And instead of trying to cut like all the way through on the first pass, I'll do like 3 or 4 like lighter passes with the knife. I just find that creates like a nicer cut rather than just trying to force it all the way through the material in one cut. And for little short edges like that on the ends of the part, I can just freehand it. I don't need the ruler if it's just a short little line. So carry on all the way around. For longer edges, of course, use the ruler, get a nice straight edge. And there we go, there's our first part cut out. Looks good. Right, same with the next part. Just put that onto our sheet of foam core board. Just kind of cut off the excess. You don't really need to cut off the excess, but it's just kind of easier to work with if there isn't all that bulk attached to it. Just tape around the edges with the masking tape, making sure that the piece is lying nice and smooth and flat. Get my knife, and this time I'll start just by cutting out some of the details. There's a couple of little kind of notched parts that will eventually be like weird tabs for another part that will attach to this component, will be attached. But it's easier just to start with some of those details while all around the outside of the piece is still attached to the card and it's nice and flat. So yeah, just carefully cut, making sure the knife stays like straight up and down, isn't on a big kind of tilted angle to the side or anything, so you get nice clean vertical flat cuts. Carefully cut all the details. And there we have our second part. Looks good. Except you can see in the corner, I could see in the corner of those little notched parts that I cut out that there was just some excess material that hadn't quite been cut cleanly, so I got a very sharp, in this case, X-Acto kind of scalpel craft knife with a really sharp pointed tip, and just cleaned out those little corners in there. Got it all looking smart, just giving it a good check over and making sure it's all clean and flat. This next piece has like a little strip of cardboard that will be glued along the top, so I'm just marking the position of where that little strip will go, just with a compass point, just putting a couple of little dots. And then that little strip that I just mentioned and one other detail will just be cut out of this 1000 GSM black cardboard. So I'm just taping those parts onto the cardboard and then using a bigger knife this time. This is an 18mm snap-off craft knife. It's just easier to cut through that thick hard board. And there we go, there's that little detail strip that I was talking about. And then this is just one other little part that will be glued to the top of the sill section later date. So I've cut out all the parts except for that one. And this one here I'm going to cut out of this really nice shiny black foil board. It's actually just like a very thin board, easy to cut, but it looks beautiful. It looks like really glossy, shiny painted metal. So any part that's going to be like used on the outside of the car, I will use that shiny black foil board for. Now this piece actually has a couple of folds, so what I'm doing here is I'm scoring where those folds will be. I'm actually not, I'm not cutting, I've retracted the blade all the way back into that knife, and I'm using the metal tip that's kind of left on the front of the knife to run along, pressing quite firmly against the ruler and into the material, just to make a score line, and that will help fold the piece lengthways, as you'll see in just a second. So again, just like scoring down, pressing quite hard, do a couple of passes. Cool, done. And then just, continue cutting the rest of the piece out from the material, and there we go, all cut out. This piece here actually has like a number of like sort of semicircular details down one side. It's just like what the real Gallardo has underneath the side sill section. So what I found was easiest was to just like punch where I wanted those holes to be out with a hole punch. I took the bottom off it so I could see the hole, where the hole was going to be punched as a guide. Punched those out, and then just finished up the profile of each of those little moldings with just freehanded it with my 8mm knife. Now you can see that board, when you cut it, it leaves a white edge, but because I want the car to be black, I don't want white edges on those black shiny parts. So I'm just going to run around with a Sharpie and make sure all those white edges just nicely black. Just black them all in. So you can just whip around. If you for example were building a model like this and used a different colored card for the outside of your car, you would have to paint or use a different colored felt tip of the same color as the outside of your car. But black's easy to work with because it hides little mistakes and it's easy to just whip around with a Sharpie, etc. Oh, and also like just the inside of each end of that piece, I don't want the insides to be visible as white as well, so I'll just blacken a little bit out with the Sharpie again. And now we're going to fold along those two long score lines that we did earlier. You can just lay it on the side of a table, weigh it down with some books, and just carefully press. Just start the fold gently this way. I find this makes like a nicer fold than if you just sort of just roughly freehand try to fold it to start with, especially if your card is a little bit thicker like this one is than other cards. So just carefully get it started using the edge of your table, and then once they're started you can just finish by sort of freehanding it like this. Cool, and there we go. It's roughly folded up. Now to start gluing everything together, what I'm going to do is use just PVA glue. It's easy to use. It dries reasonably fast. It's non-toxic. It's just a good glue to generally work with when you're doing hobbies like this. Just put a little bit on. If there's a little bit much there, you can just smooth it out, remove a bit of the excess. Carefully line up the part that you're gluing on. That's probably the key thing, like just make sure the part that you're gluing on is like really carefully aligned, and then just weigh it down with a book or something like that, so it's nice and flat and smooth, and just leave it to dry. Once that's dried, just continue gluing all the different pieces together. Put a little bit of glue on, kind of smear it flat with a bit of tissue. You can use like a little set square like that to make sure everything's aligned along the edge nicely. Use your book to kind of weigh it down flat while it dries. Here I'm just running a little bit of glue along the edge and putting that thin cardboard strip in the place where I marked the corners with the little compass, making sure that's nice and flat. And there we go, that's all the main pieces glued together into a single unit. And that gets glued inside the outer shiny body coloured kind of skin that we folded up earlier. So just do a test fit, make sure everything's fitting well, aligns well. You know that when you put the glue on like this and you glue the two together, you know exactly how it's going to line up. Doing a little test run like that with no glue was a really, really good technique, a good tip. Carefully check the alignment, and if everything looks good and smooth and flat and aligned properly, weigh it down with your book, wait for it to dry. And on this particular part, like there's a seam along the bottom as well on the inside that needs to be glued, so that's what I'm doing here, just putting a little bit of glue. Fold it over carefully, make sure the fold, the edge is nice and smooth and flat, and I'll just sit and wait for it to dry. This next part I'm going to use like a Loctite super glue universal gel. It's just like a super glue that dries within a few minutes and glues really, really strong. But the key with this is to use like just a tiny little amount. I'd even put like a bit too much on here, so what I'm doing is I'm just using like a Q-tip to remove a bit of the excess glue, kind of like lay it down, smear it out a bit flatter as well. Because if you carefully pop it on this part and press it down and that super glue kind of oozes out the side, what it's going to do is it's just going to melt off like it's going to melt off the pigment from the top of the foil board and just look really messy. So the second to last thing to do with this part is to roll in like a crease or like a molding on the side of the sill. If you look at a real Gallardo for this particular part, it has this little kind of crease line molded in. And that's why I glued in that little strip of black cardboard along the top of the inside of that foam board piece, so that once we've glued the shiny black foil board onto the outside like this, we can come back in just with I find a roll of masking tape works really well because it's kind of soft and it just molds into the material that you're rolling and just makes a beautiful little crease like that all the way along. Sweet. So the very last thing to do is to super glue, just with a little bead of super glue, just to glue on this side skirt piece along the bottom. On the real Gallardo, this is a sweet little piece of carbon fiber, but we're just kind of emulating that effect on this part. You just hold it for a couple of minutes, make sure it's aligned properly and that there's no excess glue oozing out the sides. And if that's all good, here we go. That's the final completed assembled component, ready to pop onto the car. That foil board is really nice, looks shiny, real shiny, just like a glossy, painted, beautiful car. And that's the underside as well, so that came out pretty good too. Alright, so let's put it onto the car, eh? It should just slip on should fit pretty good, I'm hoping. Just clicks into place using the tabs and the slots that are built into that piece. A little bit of kind of wiggling around, pressing, just snaps on, fits real good. Cool, and there we go. There's the final piece, the final lower side sill component attached to the rest of the ongoing Gallardo build. Looks pretty good. I'm happy with that.